The story did not begin with sirens or handcuffs. It began with a sentence that traveled faster than verification ever could. Can Yaman was arrested in Istanbul. Within minutes, that claim appeared across social platforms, fan pages, and anonymous entertainment accounts, each repeating it with growing certainty and shrinking context. Yet behind the viral phrasing, the reality was already far more complex. According to sources familiar with the situation, the events in Istanbul unfolded quietly, procedurally, and without the dramatic markers the internet would later attach to them. What actually occurred, insiders insist, was a request for questioning linked to a broader inquiry, not a formal arrest on charges. But once a narrative escapes into public space, precision becomes optional. The night in question reportedly followed a routine pattern at first. A low-profile setting, limited visibility, and an effort to avoid attention, conditions celebrities often prefer when moving through a city that never truly stops watching. Nothing about the evening suggested a turning point was coming. Then, according to accounts, authorities made contact. Not publicly. Not confrontationally. Calmly. In situations like these, procedure matters. A request to clarify presence, timeline, and associations is not an accusation, it is a mechanism. Still, the distinction between questioned and arrested rarely survives the first wave of posts. As the claim spread, it evolved. Drug-related charges became part of the headline, despite no official document confirming such charges against Can Yaman himself. Insiders emphasize a crucial detail that was largely ignored online: the inquiry was broader than any single individual. In such contexts, proximity can trigger questioning without implying guilt. Who was present? Who arrived when? Who interacted with whom? These are the questions investigators ask before they decide what matters and what does not. Can Yaman's name entered the conversation because of presence, not because of evidence, sources say. Yet the algorithm rewards certainty, not nuance. As the hours passed, another claim joined the first, then released. This detail, ironically closer to the truth, only added fuel to speculation. Why would someone be released so quickly if the claims were accurate? The internet answered with imagination. Some suggested influence. Others suggested secrecy. Few considered the simplest explanation: questioning concluded without grounds to proceed. According to people close to the process, Can Yaman cooperated fully. He answered questions, clarified timelines, and maintained consistency. No substances were presented to him. No charges were read. No formal detention occurred. And yet, the damage was already in motion. Silence followed. Not because there was something to hide, but because speaking too soon can harden a false narrative. Legal advisors often recommend restraint while facts settle. Public opinion, however, interprets restraint as mystery. The gap between those interpretations widened by the hour. International pages translated the claim into multiple languages, each time sharpening the language and dulling the qualifiers. By morning, questioned had vanished entirely from the story. Only arrested remained. What most readers never saw were the quiet indicators that contradicted the viral version. No court appearance. No official statement of charges. No follow-up summons. No corroborating reports from primary sources. The machinery of rumor had outrun verification. In this environment, the word released became a cliffhanger rather than a conclusion. Released from what, exactly? From a formal process that never escalated. From a misunderstanding amplified by repetition. From a story that preferred shock to sequence. As attention intensified, Can Yaman's public channels remained silent. That silence was interpreted in every possible way, except the most likely one: waiting. Waiting for clarity. Waiting for the narrative to exhaust itself. Waiting for facts to reassert their place. In the next part, we will reconstruct the precise sequence that led to the Istanbul questioning, identify where the drug-related charges phrasing originated, and explain how a single mistranslation turned procedure into scandal. To understand how the phrase drug-related charges became inseparable from Can Yaman's name, it is necessary to examine not what happened in Istanbul, but how information escaped the original context. According to insiders, the inquiry that night was part of a wider procedural review linked to a location, not a person. In such situations, authorities often investigate environments rather than individuals, especially when multiple people are present. The inquiry reportedly involved questions about substances potentially connected to the setting, not accusations directed at specific attendees. This distinction, while obvious in legal terms, is almost invisible once information passes through informal channels. The first leak did not come from officials or legal representatives. It came from a secondary observer who described the situation using incomplete language. That description was then copied, shortened, and reframed. Somewhere between the second and third retelling, drug-related inquiry became drug-related charges. The shift was subtle but decisive. Once the word charges appeared, the narrative hardened. Readers assumed formal accusation where none existed. Pages that specialize in sensational content amplified the phrasing without verification, knowing that retraction carries little value compared to initial impact. As the story spread internationally, translation errors compounded the problem. In several languages, the distinction between questioned, detained, and arrested is often blurred in casual usage. What began as a procedural clarification was translated as a legal action. Each translation stripped away context until only the most extreme interpretation remained. By the time the story reached a wider audience, the process had been completely redefined. Insiders close to the situation stressed that at no point were drug-related charges formally presented to Can Yaman. No document. No record. No legal notice. Yet the absence of contradiction allowed speculation to thrive. Silence, again, played a central role. Legal teams reportedly advised against immediate correction, anticipating that direct engagement would only prolong the cycle. Instead, they expected the story to collapse under its own inconsistencies. In many cases, this strategy works quietly. But in this case, the combination of celebrity status and international reach kept the rumor alive longer than expected. Meanwhile, details that contradicted the scandal narrative continued to surface quietly. Individuals present at the same location were questioned and released under similar conditions, without headlines following them. No substances were publicly linked to the gathering. No charges were filed against any of the attendees. These facts, however, lacked the shock value required to compete with the existing storyline. As hours turned into days, the word released began to be used as proof of something hidden, rather than evidence of resolution. Commentators suggested behind-the-scenes influence or intervention, ignoring the more plausible explanation that questioning had concluded without consequence. This pattern reflects a broader issue in modern celebrity reporting. Outcomes are less interesting than accusations. Resolution does not generate engagement. Suspicion does. For Can Yaman, the result was a narrative detached from the procedural reality. He had become the face of a story that no longer depended on facts. In the next and final part, we will examine the aftermath, how the narrative slowly lost momentum, why no follow-up action occurred, and what this episode reveals about the fragile line between investigation and public judgment. By the time the second day passed, a pattern had become impossible to ignore. Despite the explosive headlines, nothing concrete followed the claims about Can Yaman in Istanbul. No official arrest report surfaced. No court schedule appeared. No prosecutor issued a statement. The machinery that normally activates after real charges remained completely still. According to sources familiar with the process, this silence was not accidental. It was confirmation. The questioning had concluded without sufficient grounds to proceed, and as a result, the matter quietly dissolved within the system. This is the part of the story that rarely receives attention, because it lacks drama. Release without charges does not satisfy an audience trained to expect scandal. Yet this outcome is far more common than viral narratives suggest. In procedural inquiries, especially those linked to locations or broader reviews, many individuals are questioned as a matter of routine. Most are released without consequence. Can Yaman's case followed this exact pattern. He was questioned, his statements were reviewed, and his timeline was verified. With no evidence tying him to any illegal activity, there was nothing left to pursue. Insiders emphasize that the word released was never meant to imply a reversal of fortune or a hidden intervention. It simply marked the end of a process that never escalated. Still, the public story lagged behind reality. Even as the legal situation settled, online discussion continued to recycle earlier claims, detached from any new information. The absence of updates was misinterpreted as secrecy, when in fact there was nothing left to update. No news is often the clearest indicator that an inquiry has ended. Behind the scenes, attention shifted toward containment rather than defense. Public relations advisors reportedly focused on preventing further distortion rather than correcting every false claim. Direct confrontation with rumor can prolong its lifespan. Instead, they allowed the narrative to burn itself out as newer stories replaced it. This strategy relies on time rather than argument. And slowly, it worked. Search trends declined. Engagement dropped. Pages that had rushed to publish sensational headlines moved on without revisiting the story. No corrections were issued, but none were needed for those paying attention. The lack of follow-up spoke louder than any statement could have. For Can Yaman, the episode left a different kind of mark. Not a legal one, but a reputational reminder of how quickly presence can be transformed into suspicion. The experience underscored a reality faced by public figures everywhere. Being in the wrong place at the wrong time can generate narratives that operate independently of truth. In this case, the truth was simple but unremarkable. There were no charges. No arrest. No hidden deal. Just a procedural inquiry that ended where most do, quietly and without consequence. Yet the internet rarely rewards simplicity. It rewards escalation. That imbalance is what allowed a brief moment in Istanbul to expand into an international rumor cycle. As days passed, the story faded not because it was resolved publicly, but because it no longer produced novelty. This is how most modern scandals end. Not with closure, but with distraction. What remains is the lesson. Words matter. Distinctions matter. Questioned is not arrested. Inquiry is not charge. Release is not reversal. When those distinctions disappear, narratives replace reality. For observers willing to look beyond the headline, the conclusion is clear. Can Yaman was questioned as part of a broader procedural matter, released without charges, and never formally accused of any crime. Everything else was amplification. And in the end, the loudest part of the story was never what happened in Istanbul, but how quickly the world decided it knew what had happened before the facts had a chance to surface.